They walked onto that set as strangers in 1976. Three aspiring actors, one tiny apartment set at ABC Studios, and a script that was barely held together. Within days, they were acting like a family. Within weeks, they were keeping secrets from the world and from each other. When Three's Company started filming, no one understood how explosive that chemistry actually was. It was supposed to be a simple farce about a man pretending to be gay to live with two women. But the emotions off camera were dangerously real. They laughed together between takes. They held each other when nerves kicked in. And they made a silent promise in those early rehearsal days. No matter what happens, we protect each other. That was the first rule. The second rule was darker, and it was one they never spoke aloud. The producers saw it almost instantly. The looks, the lingering touches, the way the air shifted when John Ritter and Joyce DeWitt were in the same room. There was an attraction there that wasn't in the script, a magnetic, undeniable pull that terrified the studio. Because if the cast fell in love with each other in real life and then fell apart, the entire show could collapse. So they suppressed it. They ignored it. They buried it under slapstick comedy and pratfalls. But here is the problem with burying feelings. They don't die. They grow. And Joyce DeWitt would later confess the truth that haunted the set for years. We had so much sexual tension, it was impossible to ignore. What the world saw was a comedy. What was actually happening was a slow-motion tragedy of forbidden love, immense greed, and a betrayal that would leave scars for decades. To understand the scale of the heartbreak, you have to understand the depth of the bond. In 1977, television was changing. Three's Company was a risk. The critics hated it before it even aired. They called it trash. They called it scandalous. This external pressure did something profound to the cast. It forced them into a bunker mentality. John Ritter, Joyce DeWitt, and Suzanne Somers created a fortress around themselves. "It is us three against the world," John would say. And for those first 2 years, it was paradise. John Ritter was the heart. He was chaotic, brilliant, a physical comedy genius who could make a phone book sound funny. But off camera, he was deeply sensitive, a man who craved connection and harmony. Suzanne Somers was the light. Bubbling, energetic, playing the dumb blonde archetype with a wink that let you know she was in on the joke. And Joyce DeWitt, she was the anchor, the serious one, the one who kept the boys in line. But something shifted very quickly between the anchor and the heart. While the media was busy falling in love with Suzanne Somers, John Ritter was quietly falling into a deep, emotional reliance on Joyce. They were the mom and dad of the set. They arrived together. They ate lunch together. They reviewed scripts together. Witnesses on set recall that John, who was married at the time, had a way of looking at Joyce that was disarming. It wasn't just flirtation. It was total adoration. He would tease her relentlessly, trying to break her serious facade just to see her smile. And when she did, his whole face would light up. It was innocent until it wasn't. By the time season 2 began filming, everyone on set could feel it. This wasn't just co-star chemistry. This was intimacy. They knew each other's rhythms. They could communicate without speaking, but the timing was cruel. John was a man of principle, a man committed to his family. Joyce was in a serious relationship. They were trapped in the classic Hollywood dilemma. They found the right person at the wrong time. So they made a choice. They would pour all that love, all that frustration, and all that desire into the characters of Jack Tripper and Janet Wood. If you go back and watch those early seasons now, you aren't watching acting. You are watching two people engaging in a safe, televised courtship where they could touch, hug, and love each other as long as the director didn't say, "Cut." If you'd like to support the research we do to uncover deep stories like this one, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means we can continue to bring these untold truths to light. But feelings that strong require a release valve. As the show exploded into a global phenomenon, the pressure on the cast intensified. They were working 12-hour days, trapped in that small apartment set. And in that confinement, the lines began to blur. Joyce DeWitt later described their relationship in a way that suggests something deeper than friendship. She talked about a shared soul. She said, "John and I were the ones who wanted to do the work. We were the actors. This shared passion for the craft became their love language. While Suzanne was beginning to look outward towards fame, John and Joyce looked inward towards each other. There were rumors, of course, whispers among the crew about long lunches in trailers, about emotional conversations that stopped abruptly when someone walked in. But it wasn't a sordid affair. It was an emotional entanglement. John Ritter was a man who needed to be loved. He was a people pleaser to his core. And Joyce was the only one on that set who truly saw him. She didn't see the clown. She saw the man who was exhausted, the man who was carrying the weight of the entire show on his back. She became his protector. When John was tired, Joyce would clear the room. When John was anxious, Joyce would talk him down. It was a level of intimacy that usually belongs to a marriage. And this closeness birthed a new dynamic, the exclusion. Without meaning to, John and Joyce had formed a unit of two, a dyad, and that left the third roommate, Suzanne Summers, on the outside, looking in. Suzanne felt it. She later said she felt like the third wheel in her own show. While John and Joyce were finishing each other's sentences and sharing inside jokes, Suzanne was sitting in her dressing room, planning her escape. She realized that she would never have that emotional connection with John. He had given that part of himself to Joyce. So, Suzanne decided to chase something else. If she couldn't have the heart of the show, she would take the fame. And that is when the family began to rot from the inside. It started with magazine covers. By 1979, Suzanne Somers was the breakout star. She was on Newsweek, she was on lunchboxes, she was America's sweetheart. The press ignored John's genius and Joyce's stability. They only wanted Chrissy Snow. This shift in attention cracked the foundation of the group. John Ritter, the undeniable lead of the show, felt sidelined, but he was too polite, too kind to say it out loud. Joyce, however, was furious, not for herself, but for John. She felt that Suzanne was disrespecting the work, disrespecting the ensemble. The tension on set went from sexual to suffocating. But the nuclear bomb dropped in 1980. Season 5 contract negotiations. Suzanne Somers walked into the executive's office and demanded a raise. But not just a raise. She wanted her salary jumped from $30,000 an episode to $150,000. She wanted a percentage of the show's profits. Basically, she demanded to be paid what John Ritter was paid. In today's world, we might see this as a fight for equal pay. But in 1980, on that specific set, it was interpreted as an act of war. To John and Joyce, this wasn't business. This was personal. They had a pact. We protect each other. By holding the show hostage, Suzanne was threatening John's livelihood and Joyce's career. The reaction was swift and brutal. John Ritter, the man who hated conflict, the man who wanted everyone to be happy, felt betrayed by the woman he had helped make a star. And Joyce went cold. The mom and dad of the set closed ranks. They decided that Suzanne didn't want to be part of the team. She wouldn't exist to them. What followed was one of the most painful seasons in television history. The producers refused Suzanne's demands, but they couldn't fire her immediately due to contracts. So they exiled her. Suzanne was forced to film her scenes separately. She would come in early in the morning, film a 60-second phone call scene on an empty soundstage, and leave before the rest of the cast arrived. For an entire year, the characters of Jack and Janet talked about Chrissy, but the actors John and Joyce never saw Suzanne. The family was dead. The apartment was haunted. This is where the story turns from drama to depression. The world still laughed at Three's Company. The ratings were still high, but the joy was gone. Crew members from that era described the set as a morgue. John Ritter was suffering. He had lost his comedic partner, his little sister, Suzanne. And in his grief, he clung even tighter to Joyce DeWitt. The sexual tension between them morphed into a shared trauma. They were survivors of a shipwreck. They would sit together for hours, analyzing what went wrong, fueling each other's anger and sadness. "How could she do this to us?" became the mantra. But a strange thing happens when you bond over hatred. It drains you. The lightness that made John Ritter magic began to fade. He was still funny. He was a professional. But the spark behind his eyes dimmed. He was acting on autopilot. And Joyce? She became the gatekeeper of his pain. She shielded him from the press. She took the hits. She managed the narrative. But deep down, she knew the magic of the trio was gone forever. When Suzanne was finally, officially fired and replaced, there was no goodbye party. There were no tears. Just a cold, hard silence. John and Joyce didn't call her. They didn't write. They simply erased her from their lives. It was a defense mechanism. If they acknowledged her, they would have to acknowledge the pain. The show limped on for a few more years with new roommates, but it was never the same. When Three's Company finally ended in 1984, the cast didn't just walk away from the set, they walked away from each other. John Ritter went on to a massive career. He kept working, kept smiling, kept being the nicest guy in Hollywood. But Joyce DeWitt did something drastic. She looked at what Hollywood had done to her family, the greed, the betrayal, the fake smiles, and she rejected it all. She quit acting. She packed her bags and disappeared. She traveled the world, meditated, sought spiritual peace. She wanted to scrub the toxicity of that set from her soul. For 20 years, the three of them, John, Joyce, and Suzanne, never spoke. Not once. The silence was louder than any scream. It is the cruelest irony of life that we often wait until the end to forgive. For 2 decades, John Ritter carried the weight of that broken friendship. He would mention Suzanne in interviews with a tight smile, changing the subject quickly. The anger had faded, replaced by a dull ache. And then, in 2003, something shifted. Perhaps John sensed something. Perhaps he realized that life is too short for old grudges. Suzanne Summers received a phone call. It was John. He was filming a new show, 8 Simple Rules. He was happy again, and he wanted to heal the wound. They talked, they laughed. For the first time in 23 years, Jack Tripper and Chrissy Snow were friends. They made plans to have a cameo together. They talked about a reunion. The ice was finally breaking. Joyce DeWitt, too, was softening. The possibility of the three of them being in the same room again became real. The ending they deserved was finally within reach. But Hollywood doesn't always give happy endings. Just weeks after that phone call, on September 11, 2003, John Ritter was on set rehearsing. He started sweating. He complained of chest pains. He thought it was the flu. He was rushed to the hospital across the street, the same hospital where he was born. Doctors thought it was a heart attack. They were wrong. It was an aortic dissection, a tear in the main artery of his heart. It is a condition often caused by stress, by high blood pressure, by a heart that has worked too hard. John Ritter died that evening. He was 54 years old. It was his daughter's birthday. The news shattered the world, but it destroyed Joyce DeWitt, the man she had loved, protected, and shared a soul with for nearly 30 years was gone in an instant. And the reconciliation? It was cut short. The tragedy didn't end with his death. The toxicity of the past reared its head one last time. When Suzanne Summers tried to attend the funeral, she was told she wasn't welcome. John's family, protective of him to the end, hadn't forgotten the pain of 1980. Joyce DeWitt attended. She stood there, quietly, watching her soulmate being lowered into the ground. She didn't make a scene. She didn't give interviews. She just mourned the man who was the other half of her greatest untold love story. So, what really happened on that set? Was it just a sitcom? Or was it a tragedy disguised as a farce? The promise they made, we protect each other, was broken by the very industry that made them stars. But the feelings were real. Joyce DeWitt eventually came out of hiding. She eventually sat down with Suzanne Summers on a talk show years after John's death, and they wept together. They wept for the time lost. They wept for the ego that got in the way. But mostly, they wept for John. The sexual tension that started it all, that electric charge between John and Joyce, never found its resolution. It remains suspended in time, captured on celluloid tape. If you watch the show today, look closely. Look past the pratfalls and the misunderstandings. Look at the way John looks at Joyce. You aren't seeing Jack looking at Janet. You're seeing a man looking at the woman he loved, in a life he couldn't have, in a timeline that wasn't theirs. They were strangers who became a family, and then strangers again. And the only thing that remains is the laughter, echoing in an empty room. If this story of lost love and Hollywood secrets moved you, please like this video. It helps us tell more stories like this. Subscribe for the next investigation. Goodbye.